with us today. Two things come to mind when I think of Todd. Genuine man, accomplished professional. When we think about Vern Budge, this is the Vern Budge edition of the speaker series, and Vern taught here for about 35 years. I think of accomplished person, or genuine person, accomplished professional. And so in thinking about how to make a fit, Todd was a natural fit. I first met Todd in about 1988. We had founded a firm called Civitas in 1984. Maybe it was 1990. And we were looking for the 13th person to join the firm. So while that may be an unlucky number, it was certainly a lucky number getting Todd. What we looked for, as all of you look to matriculate, move from sophomore to junior, junior to senior, and senior on to engagement in a practice, what we look for are people like Todd. And so he was with us, he was with Civitas for about 22 years, and then was attracted to the idea of going to an iconic firm led by maybe one of the most famous landscape architects of the late 20th century, Pete Walker. So he joined Peter Walker Partnership and spent 5 years there. And then his curiosity continued to encourage him to investigate another significant San Francisco firm called the Office of Cheryl Barton. And a couple of years ago, a very significant office headquartered in New York City called SCAPE merged with Cheryl Barton, and Todd finds himself with one of the leading practices in the world today. As he describes in his bio, he's come full circle. As a nature boy and a Bachelor of Science degree from Wisconsin, that would be the science part, that would be the nature part. As a member of the Civitas team for 22 years and then Peter Walker Partners, certainly that would be the art side, right? So when I think of Todd from a content point of view, I think of the mergence of the science and the art of landscape architecture. And I would say our future is solidly in shifting more and more to measurable results and environmental responsibility, ecological responsibility. And that's what Todd stands for. So tell us about your journey.
Thank you. Okay, is this working? And you can hear me? Great. So Todd and I not only are bound by our Midwestern small town roots, but by a love for design, a really passionate approach to landscape architecture, and music. We talked a lot about music, and as you'll see, back in those days, in the 90s, we didn't work on computers to do our renderings. We gathered around a table in a 5x5 drawing with Prismacolors and spent long hours creating the next step that we're going to do in presentation. But Todd asked me, when, my thought, well, what am I going to talk about? And he asked me what I'm thinking about. And I have been thinking about our little spaceship here and the condition that it's in, and thinking about what I've been reading lately, which is always passing through my mind. I've been reading Neil deGrasse Tyson, astrophysicist, Craig Childs, archaeologist and explorer who's written tremendous books about the West, and Terry Tempest Williams. All of these folks have a Utah connection, which I thought was coincidental. And this series of books come in on scale. And I've also, reached a certain vintage and you start thinking about time. You all are looking at the time ahead. I'm starting to think about the time behind. So I needed to come up with a title. And the Talking Heads have a song called Once in a Lifetime. And this is a line from that. What is this beautiful place? And this is our beautiful place. So first, let's think about context. You know, we're on our little Earth that's 7,900 miles in diameter, and we live in a place that's 93 billion light years across, and the universe is 13.8 billion years old. I mean, think about what we are, what humans are in this kind of context, and it's humbling. Another fun fact is that the universe and we are basically made out of the same material. There's 6 primary elements, and most of those are in human beings. So when you step out, no, I don't. When you step out to Neptune, which is the edge of the solar system, this is what Earth looks like. This is a photo that Carl Sagan asked to be taken from Voyager 1, you know, that headed out a long time ago. So here we are from 3 billion miles away. That's a pretty lonely place. It's pretty isolated, and it's precious. So when we think about our home, Ed Abbey, great Utah writer, he's writing about Utah when he talks about this heartbreaking beauty. And where I am now, thinking about this notion of beauty needing a reboot, because our control of nature is not being successful. We've threatened our ability to adapt in a changing climate. So this is a backstory to all of what we do as landscape architects now, and particularly at SCAPE, what it needs to carry beyond that. Another fun thought, 13,000 years ago, the ocean was 400 feet lower. The area between those green lines was all land. And in a very short period of time, humans moved all the way around to Patagonia in maybe 1,000 years. And so when we talk about the first peoples in Utah, they got there a long time ago. And the entire country was populated at that point, probably 1 million people. And we have no understanding of that. And part of that issue is that, let's see if I can get, is all this land area that's now underwater is where they lived. They lived on the shoreline. So we've lost a lot of that, the history of their place on Earth. So Wallace Stegner, another wonderful Western writer, talking about humans as being the most dangerous species. I mean, no other species soils their nests like we are doing right now. So the question becomes, well, is this fragile or is it resilient? And I'm an optimist. I think we're resilient. The rock's been around for 4.5 billion years. I think it's going to last. But can the biomatter continue on? So we need to care about that. Another quote from Once in a Lifetime, let's not go here. My God, what have we done? Let's not do this. So we need to begin to work about what we're going to do to protect it. Some other quotes from Kate. I really love the sense that we can't assume that, you know, once we back off the damage that nature will heal itself. It's beyond that. We really need to work on it, and we being landscape architects. You know, now more than ever, I think we are at the forefront of leading thinking on that, because we bring together problem solving, we bring together the ideas, and we bring together the science. And landscape architects long talked about being stewards of the earth. Very many different professions include landscape architects, ecology, civil engineering. We can feed into that, and so the world is open to you to make some of those decisions, and some of it is what you want to do with your life. I've had a number of conversations about the idea of work life. As you know, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort to become a landscape architect. Many, many hours, and some of that will continue as you get into the profession. And so it takes passion to do that. It's really a profession that you love, and the work and life are not so separated, but they are part of one thing. And Terry Tempest Williams has put it so well, that find this thing, and I think most of you already have, find something that you really love and just go after it. Question everything that's happening around. Stand up, speak, act, and it's all about thinking and taking that passion into the world and into the projects that we do. So as Todd mentioned, I've now been at these 4 firms, and each is unique, and unique founder visions, unique motivations, work type. Each has a very special culture that comes out of the thinking of the founders. And each in their own way has been working to make the world a better place. And kind of on the side, I've also been involved with the Urban Land Institute and the Green Building Council. And both are organizations that are leading a profession in their own way. ULI is more developer-oriented. I know that there's a competition going on here for the Salt Lake City kind of combined development and design. They do that, the Heinz competition, on another scale. It's worth looking into, and they're thinking ahead now too about issues of carbon and sustainability and resilience. So, last line from David Byrne. How did I get here? You know, we all find landscape architecture in our own way. And I grew up in this little town in Fremont, Wisconsin, that originated in the 1880s as, you know, that's where the logs floated down and went into the Fox cities so they could be turned into paper. And this is a view from the house that I grew up in, basically, looking across into downtown. And this being Wisconsin, town of 500, Main Street, 5 bars and 2 blocks. And this is my grandfather. So he was into the technology of the day, the leading technology. He was born in 1899 and sold cars for 70 years. And I heard this story and found this blurry photograph much later that when he was wooing my grandmother, he had this race car. And because it was a race car, he could lock the steering. And so he locked the steering in Main Street, Fremont, set the throttle, and hopped out and let the car go. And my grandmother married him, so I guess it worked. But I love to draw, and this predates me, so I don't know if you know who Harold and the Purple Crayon are. But Harold drew his own worlds, and that's how I spent my childhood, was just drawing and thinking and just taking myself deeper into the story. And had wonderful children's books with this bird's eye perspective. And because of my grandfather, I loved cars, and so I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm going to design cars. These are some other Fremont photos. This is what it was all about. The next generation, fishing. They claimed themselves to be the white bass capital of the world. And being Wisconsin, my first job was working in a cheese factory and made cheese. And I was fortunate enough that my parents were charter members of a little ski area called Mosquito Hill, and learned to ski early on. And so that's part of what got me to Colorado. So if anybody ever needed a gap year, it was me. I had no idea where I was going. And gap year didn't exist in Fremont, Wisconsin in 1975. So I go off to a small school, and I start taking physics and math and geology, still confused. And then I took this class on environmental geology, which was really about environmental disasters, both man-made and other. And it was like, wow, this is fantastic. I love it. And I was looking to combine that with art. And Ron Tank introduced me to this book, Ian McHarg's Design with Nature, and then I was on my way. Oh, this I love. So I transferred to UW-Madison and met Daryl Morrison. And the landscape architecture program had two routes. One was called business and industry, and the other was called natural resources. And I went and got a BS in natural resources, which meant taking biology with pre-med, taking soil science with future soil scientists, climate, plants. And Daryl was all about native plant communities, and that really got me excited, and I really loved it. And he shared those matches for prairies, specifically for prairies. But these 2 guys were in office, and I don't know if you know who they are. Ronald Reagan on the left, who thought trees pollute, and James Watt, who thought the world was coming to an end, so we needed to excavate everything we can right now. So I had this idea. I was going to the Park Service or Forest Service, and well, they were both collapsing. And so my now wife and I headed west, because if we were going to be underemployed, we were going to do it in a beautiful place. So a bit of a timeline, and you all will have your own version of this slide. These are the people who are more like mentors. I have to point out Don Ensign, who he doesn't know this, never knew this before he passed. A Utah State grad, and I believe he taught here. But while I was stumbling along on my first jobs doing design build and things like that, I went to a Colorado chapter of the ASLA, and Don gave a wonderful presentation about Design Workshop. He was one of the founders of Design Workshop. He's a very funny guy, and this beautiful work, and I think he referred to Design Workshop as a proletarian name. So it was really great. But I wrote on the top of my notebook, what does it take to work for Design Workshop? And that set me on my way to meet Lois Brink at University of Colorado, Denver. A super enthusiastic supporter of just go for it. And I was about 30 then, so I wasn't early on. And so by second semester, I was interning with Design Workshop. So it all happened very quickly once I set my mind to something. And there I met Joe Porter, who was another great advocate. And from there, Todd, Mark, and Ann, founders of Civitas. And as Mark mentioned, Pete, Cheryl, and then SCAPE. And I call these moments of growth, and they are, but they are also, this is made-up graphs. This was times of turmoil and crisis along the way. When I left Wisconsin, we were in a recession. And so that's kind of a downer, but then hit UCD, hit Civitas, and along the way, there were a whole series of economic crises. And I could not continue to work for Design Workshop because of projects related to the savings and loan collapse. And so that's how I found Mark and Todd and found myself at Civitas then for the next 20 years. And there were bangs along the way. 9/11, 2001. You all were born where? Somewhere about here? I'm halfway through my career when you're getting started. I don't know if you remember 9/11. I don't know if you remember the impact of the subprime mortgage scam. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes because of basically gambling on zero mortgages. And it was a crisis time for me and my family. The work had gone away, and our son was in college, and every dollar we saved for him was worth 60 cents. And we were just struggling. And so it kind of got me churning. What happens? Why am I a landscape architect? What do I do next? And so I started talking to people. And one of the people I talked to was Pete, and he said, well, come on out. And that became I guess, in landscape architecture. This could be a really wonderful change. And I should also point out, my son was born between first and second year of grad school, and I was commuting 90 miles a day each way. I don't recommend either one of those. So I didn't have a lot of studio time, and I had to be really serious and efficient about it along the way. And then next, with PWP, I had an opportunity to help Cheryl as her senior person was going through a health crisis. So it became an opportunity to help Cheryl and her business. And then the pandemic happens. And so that, once again, cut everything loose. And where are we? What do we want to do? And we were thinking about transitioning the firm. And Cheryl and Kate had gotten to know each other through the CEO roundtable and said, well, why don't we get together? Kate was looking to develop a West Coast presence, and it was a perfect way to combine the firms. And it's been fantastic. We're just so fortunate. So, even though they're moments of crisis, each one of those led to a point of joy, just ecstatic about these changes. And this also represents the recoveries. And there's always going to be recoveries. You will have your own line of these crises that happen through your career. And there are opportunities to think, change, and go further. So I wanted to talk a little bit about each firm that I've been at. And I'll start with Civitas. And this is for Todd. This is MCI. This is basically my first project at Civitas, working with Todd. And phase 1, ink on Mylar. I hope you know what ink is and what Mylar is. And by the way we got to the 4th phase, it was all computerized. And so things were changing very rapidly. And we used to joke that Todd would start in the middle of this courtyard and start to design. Mark would start with the building and pull it together. And there's some truth to that, but they're both really, really important because you need to engage what's around. And this is a building by Gensler, the architecture firm. And the outer wrap is all this red sandstone, lion sandstone. It's in Colorado Springs. So we made this focused water-intensive landscape in the center, and the rest is all native landscape around it, edging its way back. Garden of the Gods City Park is just beyond that ridge in the background. But it was just a wonderful way to reach into the native landscape around. All of the backdrop, of course, is healthy and native. Another project was Amgen in Longmont. It's no longer Amgen, but Civitas still exists. And it was a lot about, well, what's the source of a design idea? And this is an agricultural land. It was developed with canals very early on. So it was a lot about topography and pattern. And I was really cut loose as the designer on this and had a blast working with Mark in this case of, I would do these careful drawings talking about the ideas, and then we'd get together and Mark would scribble. And I just love these notes because he starts making references to Olmsted, to Hargraves, to A.E. By, where A.E. By is also worth checking out, to Pete and Kylie. And ultimately it was like slice these into 3 separate gardens. And part of that is, this is a biomedical manufacturing site. There were going to be less than 100 people working here, but it was part of a master plan where there'd be 1,000 people in the future. So our decision was to make more of an object landscape. And it was all about the landform, and had some real fun with that, as you can tell. And it became, we called this the Wave Garden. And this is its first season into the fall. The grasses were tremendously successful. We were just loving it, and it was going to be big and fuzzy. And then we learned that these little inlets along the way were not connected to any pipes. So the contractor comes in. I said, whatever you do, don't pile your soil up on the berms because the grass is doing so well, it won't recover. Well, sure enough, they piled up the soil on the berms. And so after a couple of years, the owner said, enough. We want it to be lawn. So we had to take the native grasses off that lawn, off those berms, and turn it into bluegrass. So it's kind of heartbreaking, but it still exists. And I drove by there on my way up. There was another series of landforms to screen the manufacturing building from the road, and they're still pretty healthy. This is all crested wheat and western wheat grasses. I'm hoping that they only cut it down for the winter. I'm hoping. But this is 25 years of growth on ponderosa pine. So it's kind of heartening to see something with this much time passing looking quite good. And I was wandering your campus, and I was really pleased to see this water-efficient landscape idea as part of your future and start to study what might happen here. Another project at Civitas was with Beloit College. These are Native American effigy mounds that are scattered around the campus. A beautiful campus in a struggling industrial town, and a campus that had gone through its own struggles. And we came on first to do a master plan. And an interesting piece of that was they described science, humanities, and art as academic divisions. And we learned very quickly that they were divided. And so the three of us on the team went in and met with them individually, and the youngest guy got just raked over the coals. And by the end of the master plan, we were being called the campus psychologists because we got these guys talking to each other. They all felt like somebody else was getting the most money, the best deal. And we started to unify the campus and unify them with the city. And ultimately built a garden outside of a new science building, which we sited, and it became a central space on the campus. And so there were a number of native bur oaks that predated the school was established in 1848, and the trees were older than that. And so we created this savanna landscape reaching up into the main campus from the garden. And the campus biologists and professors collected acorns from the native trees, grew them in the greenhouse that was part of this new science building, and planted them on the slope. It's really just this fabulous story of knitting it all together. And incidentally, we were told that the campus was divided by a street. There was the academic core and then a residential community, and a street that we were told the city will never allow that to change. Well, it's now the science building. We convinced them to take the street out and unify the campus as a whole, and it was super successful. So, I mean, lessons learned. I mean, I was there 22 years. That was where I grew up. 20 years doesn't take very long to go by, for sure. Someone asked this question earlier today, is, well, what kind of work should we do? I'm not sure. Just pick one. It'll change later. You're not locked in for the rest of your career by making a decision now. One thing I was really pleased with in seeing all the classwork here was how many teams are working together. That's how it'll be in the offices. You'll be working with your colleagues within the office, but then there's a whole nother team building that project. So it's all about collaboration. It's about building relationships. If you find a good civil engineer, hang on to them. They're hard to find. And I was curious how much you know about design phases, because those become this powerful guide as you move through real projects. And a lot of what you're probably doing in school is more like concept design, schematic design. And as I see it, this is where the design is starting. This is where design is completed. This is about documentation. And then that construction observation, being there in the field, is absolutely critical. You know, as I tell some horror stories, those were learned by being in the field. Designing topography, we work in a three-dimensional world. This is a fancy way of saying grading because I emphasize that it's part of design. And I've had the opportunity to do some seminars with SCAPE talking about grading and inspiring people. 10th contours, I'll show you more about that a little bit later in the presentation. And the other thing is that, you know, you work with some places like Beloit College, and those are long-term relationships. I worked with them for about 10 years, and we were friends. And there are projects that you come back to over and over. Campuses, communities are all part of that. And that last line, you can never know enough. Every topic is valid to landscape architecture. So then I moved on to PWP. A very exciting time. A credit to my wife and daughter. My wife was able to retire after 30 plus years of teaching elementary school, and my daughter was halfway through high school and said, sure, I'll move. I'll go to Berkeley. And so it became this really wonderful opportunity for all of us. We made great friends and have had incredible experiences in California. But a little about Pete. He joined Hideo Sasaki as he got out of Harvard many years ago. And he began SWA, Sasaki Walker Associates, in San Francisco the year I was born, in 1957. And then, after having a pretty sizable corporate landscape architecture firm, very successful, incredible work, he founded PWP so that he could get back to being design focused. And they organized themselves using the term three-legged stool. Pete was design, there was somebody who focused on management, somebody who focused on construction. And that it's not really separated, but it defined how they approach projects. And Pete has always been about minimalism. Donald Judd, Carl Andre, other minimalist artists some were friends of his, and it was always an inspiration. And over time, that absolute design-driven approach to landscape architecture has moved to incorporate more and more archaeology. And when I joined PWP, Pete was 82, and the youngest 82 I've ever seen. Incredibly vibrant. We traveled all the time. And now, at 93, he started a new career as an artist, and he's had his first gallery show in January. Amazing human being. And so there's probably now best known for the World Trade Center in New York. Hugely complicated project politically and from a design standpoint. But one of my favorite projects is Barangaroo in Sydney, where these sandstone blocks were excavated out of what became an underground museum. And this is where wonderful contractors come into play. The stone company said, I've got a solution. And he put 2 6-foot-plus diameter blades on a track backhoe and just started cutting into the ground. They break them, lift them out. And there's a video somewhere online that you can find that's sped up. It's kind of entertaining. But there are thousands of these blocks. And when I arrived at PWP, there were probably 6 models of, the blocks were probably 1 inch long, and they're actually 6 feet long, of how to stack them along this shoreline. And it was an amazing thing. So I wanted to talk about a couple of projects that I worked on. One is Constitution Gardens in Washington, D.C., which was built in 1976. This pond has a concrete bottom. It's 2 feet deep. Every year, they drain the water out, get in with a backhoe, and remove the goose droppings and all the other detritus. I mean, it's an incredibly unhealthy place. All of the soil was dredged out of the Potomac River nearby. And there were a series of competitions back then for different places on the mall. And PWP's for the Constitution Gardens was selected to move forward. And so it's been battling getting funded ever since. But, this is, I think, 1920, Lincoln Memorial. This is the swamp. It's basically, kind of a estuary of the Potomac River. And by World War II, all of these so-called temporary buildings were offices for managing World War II. They were temporary buildings. They're on wooden foundations. And as we were approaching the bicentennial, it's like, okay, we need to do something. This is why we're going to create Constitution Gardens. So they tore those down. They left the footings. And so this is a site with muck out of the Potomac River, wood foundations, and very unhealthy landscape. So the PWP approach was, okay, we're gonna build that soil up, both to protect it from adjacent streets, so it's a quiet place, take the concrete bottom out of the pond, create a very naturalized edge. It's not fully natural, it's controlled approach to something that can be healthy and long lasting. And I, soon after I got to PWP, had the opportunity to grade it. We were well into schematic design and no one had done any grading. So this began as a 12-foot long piece of trace on a table over the survey. And I just had a blast, basically lying on this table with a red pencil, creating the sculpted landscape. You can see the street along the north edge, which we were trying to screen, and then also deepening the pond as we went. And so that became the overall plan. The first step was to move this little lock keeper's house, which is up in the corner. It had been in the middle of the site. We moved it to kind of a gateway. There is a movable dam here because there's still potential flooding. It's all about water purification along the street edges. And so the lockkeeper's house was step one. And just now this past year they are completing construction documents for the pond itself. So we're pretty excited to see how that change will appear and to create a much healthier lake. Another fun project at University of Texas, Austin. I learned more about bricks in this process than you can possibly imagine. But it's a very simple, bold move, a half-mile service street through what over time became a heart of the campus. And so we had a lot of grade change, side to side, and managed to have just 2 pitches in that half mile. The whole thing is a straight shot. And it was very fun. As you maybe can tell, I love grading. And this was a very fun process. But the thing I wanted to point out, this is so-called schematic design. You can see that it's fully graded. And this is drawn in Vectorworks. And a program I love because it's, basically you're drafting, but you can drop some color on it. And it looks quite good. And a unique thing about PWP is move through design development in Vectorworks and then redraw every line in CAD to start construction documents. So all of the imperfections and flaws that might be living in that document are left behind. And at first I thought, this is insane, this is so much time, but then really quickly learned that this is really awesome because you got people just focused on getting it built. So fun times. And it now is this wonderful space, all these great old live oaks that are thriving, and the passage through the campus is now a central point. And Nancy Rubin's sculpture, I forget the name of it, that thing's real, it looks like a rendering. It really is a whole lot of aluminum canoes tied together, cabled together, hanging over this passage. It's fabulous. But another fun fact, light-colored clay is inherently weaker than dark clays. And this also serves as a fire lane, so it needed to be strong. These are also extruded bricks. They are narrow and they're kind of long. When you extrude, they have this potential to curve. So that was the first issue. The other thing was we were almost going to give up on the color when the brick manufacturer found these elderly sisters whose father had a clay mine, and they had a big pile of light clay that they could build from. And so we got it going, and it's coming together. And soon after part of the project opened, the brick started cracking. And to their credit, this brick manufacturer out of Sacramento came in and recast all the bricks. They figured out they didn't meet the spec and rebuilt the entire street with bricks, and now it's holding together. It's really cool. So coming out of PWP, I mean, it was enlightening to arrive there, and it was kind of like, this is what I've always wanted to do. Detailing is really, really important to design. Draw everything, draw every view, know what every line is within your drawing. I mean, and there wasn't a lot happening three-dimensionally here. It was more visual for three-dimension. Now we can probably, through Revit, get a solid CAD level model in three-dimension. Document everything, write a really good spec, because those are they're sort of your weapons when you come into conflict with a contractor. You need to be super clear about everything that you've designed. Another amazing thing was doing full-scale mock-ups. They had a parking lot, and they would lay out, like full-size light poles made out of foam core. And you get a real sense of scale when you're building it to real-life scale. As I mentioned, the Vectorworks to AutoCAD, incredible team, and science was always so important. Geology, soils, you can read the list, but this is where I learned to do soils plans. And you go, what is a soil plan? But we can talk about that another time. But it's super important, and that's how trees survive. So as I mentioned, Cheryl had a need. We'd been friends for a very long time. Mark and I had done an inside the studio at ASLA one year, and Cheryl was our moderator, and that's how I got to know her. But she had worked with Dan Kiley up in Vermont, went to GSD, and coming out of GSD had this thesis idea about Big South Fork River in Tennessee. And she had support of the Park Service, and what she needed was a team. So she went to Nashville, found an architect, and said, I'm going to be your landscape architecture department, and you're going to help me get this built. So spent like 5 years in Nashville getting this incredible recreation area to a reality. I mean, this is tough work, and particularly as a woman driving the project, a whole nother set of battles, especially back at that time. And so later she spent 25 years as a design director for EDAW, which is now part of AECOM, built OCB, won the Rome Prize and was at the Academy in Rome for a year, and then has done a lot of work on Stanford campus and UVA. So a couple of things with Cheryl. Stanford decided they were going to develop an administrative campus in Redwood City, California, and worked with ZGF to develop an overall master plan. And this heavily planted, lovely landscape. This is all bioretention as a core of the overall campus. This is also bioretention. These wonderful social spaces. And it's just a gorgeous place. Jumping ahead a little bit, when the pandemic happened, we were proceeding with the next phase. Stanford said, wait, we don't have anybody going onto campus. We don't need all these buildings. We have a hospital that's overflowed with people suffering from COVID. We need more medical space. So it was an abrupt transition to what this whole campus might become. So there was another impact of what happens along the way. Concurrently, we were developing this campus for Santa Clara Medical Center, working with a great Oakland artist, Bruce Beasley, and so much fun. But you guys know what an RFI is? A request for information during construction? It's usually a contractor saying, I don't quite understand this in your drawings. We had over 600 RFIs on this project, and it was more like, I'm trying to find mistakes in your drawing. Here's an RFI, here's an RFI. it was the most difficult contractor I've ever worked with. And we had designed these beautiful stone walls that were battered, curved, not easy to build, but after 7 failed mock-ups, we finally let them build it, tried to float it, still looked awful. So we planted it with vines. But it's, as hard as it was, we had 2 people just working full-time, and we had a wonderful general contractor who was keeping the landscape contractor in line. And one last project from Cheryl. This is the Neurosciences building at UCSF in California. And I share this particularly because of this plaza. It's a very elegant building, a very simple and elegant plaza associated with it. But along the way, we had an understanding that we were going to replace the curb, and we were going to build out to this curb. Well, the city said, well, you can't do that. So we had to regrade it. And this is where the 10th contours come into play, because you cannot exceed 2%. And suddenly we had about 10 feet less to work with. So we had to come up with another approach. And it took very careful work. And this was all done in Revit, because so much of the building was in Revit, a complicated foundation underneath. But the 10th contours allow you to visualize just real subtle changes. And it worked. Water flowed. And we had a wonderful stone contractor. They loved the 10th contours. And you can see how perfect a job that they've done. It was really heartening. They were fun because they really loved that process. So with Cheryl is learning that these long-term relationships really matter. And she was so embedded in San Francisco. She knew so many people and so many organizations. And it was a social thing. It's really personal. And at the same time, having a wonderful sense of craft. And I put CAD standards here. CAD standards are everywhere, every firm. And it's something that you will learn as soon as you get out. It's really important to understand those to be efficient. And with Cheryl, let's fight for what is right in every project. And she is fearless. And yeah, I mentioned the nightmare contractor. So with the pandemic, we're deciding, well, what's next? Do we transition the firm to employee ownership? What do we do? And she and Kate had been talking. You may have mentioned they met through the CEO roundtable. And so we became the core of SCAPE's San Francisco office, and it was just an incredible opportunity. And I am very fortunate in my position now. I had convinced, or Cheryl was happy with me going to halftime. And so it was like, what's next? Well, backpacking, travel. And yeah, I do love work. So I just have this wonderful situation now where I work a couple days a week for SCAPE and more time on my own. And it's really a mentor-teacher role. And I do a lot of drawing review, both at the beginning of the project and a lot of developing construction documents. And I say full circle because of my origins focusing on the science of landscape architecture. And that's really what SCAPE does. So founded by Kate Orff in 2005. And what's phenomenal is she's really gotten landscape architecture out of just Landscape Architecture magazine, but into the mainstream. Time 100 list, New Yorker article, which was a lot about the oyster texture idea, which was foundational to SCAPE's early work. She is also a MacArthur Fellow, the first landscape architect MacArthur Fellow. And is now, this is, I think, this year will be our 4th year at the Venice Biennale. I mean, it's just phenomenal work, an incredible firm, and a wonderful group of people. This is the most collegial group I've ever been associated with. Very high standards, very happy people, and fun to work with. And, you know, I'm the oldest person there by a lot. But it's been great. And we have a primary office is in New York City, have a significant presence in New Orleans, and we're now up to 10 people in San Francisco. The office has really just taken off. Working all over the country, working our way inland. And what's interesting is the scale and diversity of the work. From city plazas, these happen to be in New York City, art museums, large-scale planning interventions, a lot of resilience planning, sea level rise. And we use these words to talk about ourselves, but everything we do has a significant community process because the work is all about that. We think about ecology and culture and about risk reduction with, in terms of sea level rise. And highly collaborative. We're always involving ecologists with pretty much any work. We're doing a little beach right now with a beach ecologist, which is very interesting. Probably really well known for living breakwaters. And you look at this and go, this is landscape architecture? And yet it's incredibly significant to the protection of Staten Island, rest of New York City, and it's about habitat. It's about oyster habitat and every other being that's out in the harbor. Town Branch Commons in Lexington, Kentucky was about bringing a stream that was in a pipe underneath the main street in the city to the surface. And this is where I met Kate the first time because Michelle Delk and I put together a entry in this competition, but unfortunately we didn't win, and I think SCAPE has done a fabulous job. More recently, we've opened a major park in San Francisco, right next to the Giants Stadium, and we've opened a park on the Mississippi River, Tom Lee Park, in Memphis. But I wanted to share a couple of projects that underscore that institutions are very much aware of what's happening to the climate, and they're paying attention to it, and they're investing money in it. This is the University of California, Berkeley campus, and we won this project that is titled Climate Adaptation Plan, but it's really about an assessment of the overall campus and what is going to survive there in the next 50 to 100 years. So with these goals of preserving the iconic character, improving the ecology, and exploring pathways for the campus to be pulled together with one vision are the drivers. And so we looked at these tools as where is the climate going? And they're national, state, local, and that becomes the framework against what we compare. American Horticultural Society, heat maps, sunset climate zones in a Western Garden magazine, or book, were our sources of information. And we looked at the hazards. There's a lot of eucalyptus on the campus, which are highly flammable. They're being removed in many places, but they're also very much loved. So we looked at what the sunset zones are today and where they will be in the future, and it's a pretty significant change. I mean, in the Bay Area, you drop down off the hills and it's much cooler as you get close to the water. But where you're up on the edge of the foothills behind Berkeley and Oakland, much warmer. So it's changing dramatically. Temperatures, you know, the current high becomes the current low in the future, in 50 years in the future. And so we looked at various landscape typologies and applied how we might study those and change those. And I won't go through the entire presentation. I'll flash through these pretty quickly. But we were thinking about the campus character. We were thinking about how we change those, what strategies we apply, these 5 strategies. We look at campus maintenance, another important thing that's often left behind in a project. That's what helps it survive. And I think we ought to be always writing a maintenance specification that will guide our clients to preserving a place in the future. It's California, so we're looking at fire risk. But we made these very simple diagrams of what matters in this space and what are the important elements of the Campanile Way. And so those then become an assessment of what's good, what's bad. How do we change that? We reinforce the gateways. And the conceptual section, I was talking with someone earlier today about structural soil. These plants, and pollarded plants, we talked about that in a walk yesterday. You know, they look like they're little fists up in the air, and they will never improve. So what we've proposed is to create a healthier root zone. We airspade the roots of the existing trees. We replace the pollarded trees with something that's going to really create a great canopy, and use structural soil to tie those spaces together so the trees will survive long into the future. And so there's a summary that we focused on what the planning is, what the planting is, what the maintenance is. And we went through each of these ideas of places to gather on the campus, how those sections might change, and again, what we will carry out in terms of the steps of making that happen. Restoring Strawberry Creek, that's in a pipe for a large part of Berkeley, pulling it to the surface through the campus and celebrating it, making it a place along the way, and how we go about doing that. And unifying the edges of the campus and access points. Connecting buildings, connecting spaces along the way. And then set it up for the next steps. This is simply a way of closing, but we've brought the university leadership and maintenance crews into this idea. And so we're building it. Now hopefully, ultimately, we'll establish some projects that will be moving forward. At the other end of the country, in New York City, this is Battery Park City, wrapping around the lower end of Manhattan, Governor's Island out there. And after Hurricane Sandy, it was heavily impacted. And there were deaths. There's a lot of threats to the building. Sea level's rising by 2 to 2.5 feet. Storms are becoming more intense, impacting everything. And this is the floodplain in 2050. This is World Trade Center. That's World Trade Center 1. That little trapezoid are the pools on the plaza. It's all in potential flooding. So the state and city and Battery Park City together have developed this plan to protect all of Lower Manhattan. I mean, it's an incredible piece of work, incredibly expensive, incredible commitment. And so there are pieces of it that are already under construction, East Side, Brooklyn Bridge, in design, and wrapping around the corner. Our work is in the design of the northwest Battery Park City area, that yellow. But this is the team, our client, and a design build team, contractor-led, heavy on engineering, of course, and we're sharing the landscape architecture with BIG, and that's been an interesting process as well. Major community engagement process, as you might imagine, a lot of outreach, a lot of listening, hearing what they're interested in changing, thinking about how we bring biodiversity into the process and green infrastructure and where that occurs. But this is basically a seawall, a flood barrier system. It's intensive. I'll just do a couple of short examples of it as we wrap around. And the gaps in the red are where there are gates. So you see in places where the wall's just a couple of feet high, and then gate that close when it's under threat. And the next step is then to landscape those spaces and screen the wall, integrate it with the landscape, and make it a place for people to be. Another example around the lily pond, where the wall gets significantly higher than the waterfront by the ferry terminal, 6.5 feet tall. So this rendering shows where the wall is, where this rolling gate is, and the impact. This is today's existing condition. That's how tall the wall is. So our role is to integrate that into the landscape. We've done that with really intensive planting and landform. And the benefit coming out is pretty obvious, but I think it's interesting that 0.2 reduction of home ownership costs just because of insurance, taking areas out of the floodplain. So I'll just close with one last project. This is just getting underway. It's an island off Connecticut, which has a defunct power plant on it. And this defunct power plant is one of about 20 along Long Island. So there's lots of project opportunities. But it's being driven by a nonprofit group that owns the island. And the whole intent is to make this a park for Norwalk, which lacks park space. And so the power plant becomes a community center, a water park, a dynamic space with green roofs and places to come to, combined with healing the marsh that surrounds it. So boardwalks, and this is very early on, and it's still a quiet project, but it's starting to emerge on where that might evolve to. So SCAPE is, what a learning opportunity for me. As Kate said, design that begets life, life is beautiful. And speaking about living breakwaters, and this harbor seal is a real thing. We had a rendering that had a harbor seal on it, and client group said, "You're never going to see that." And then we got this picture of a real harbor seal before the work was even done. But it's striking work in that it's not typical, but it's really, really important. So there's a lot of ways that we can all do landscape architecture. SCAPE has always been about the resilience and climate change, about creating places for biodiversity and habitat and pollinators, but it's also a remarkable culture. And we live by a set of community agreements that are all about personal respect between the team, and it extends out to who we work with. And so what we're thinking about in 2025 is really attending to the ASLA net zero goals, the ASLA climate action plan. And we are working very hard to study our design and construction process to reduce our carbon footprint. And I add AI. We're not formally doing that, but it's coming. And so some of our folks are exploring it and seeing its benefits, limitations, and dangers. And so, the point is, this thin layer of air, soil, and water is all we have. That's our survival gear. And of course, this is Berkeley, but I love that bumper sticker. It is all we've got. So with that, it's really up to us to protect this beautiful place. And I love Terry Tempest Williams' statement that to not act is a great risk, and think about future generations, because that's who we are building for now. And don't forget, it's Earth Month. Earth Day is coming up, and let's celebrate it. Thank you.